too. So today, I'm talking about slow roasted, continuing in our coffee series. And when Pastor Rob first said to me, hey, I'd like to do a series on coffee, I said, you had me at coffee, fully caffeinated. Yes, I love coffee. And I know it's not everybody's cup of tea. Get it? Okay, but it'll hit later after the caffeine kicks in. But we really weren't coffee drinkers much, like maybe, a real foo-foo coffee when we were younger. But when we were about, I think, 30 or so, we went on a trip to Kansas, and we went camping in Kansas with my brother and his family. It kind of had a family reunion there. And my brother and his wife introduced us to the deep joy of waking up to a cup of coffee sitting outside the camper. And so every day that week, Pastor Rob and I would meet them at 8:30 in the morning, and we'd sit outside in the cool of the morning and linger over cups of coffee while the kids were all playing and causing havoc. And it was just awesome. And we came home from that trip changed people. We're like, this coffee thing, we can get on board with this, okay? So it's something we really enjoy in our life. I could drink much more than I do. I believe that limitations in life and all things are good for you, just generally speaking. And so I usually don't do more than about 2 cups a day. In the winter, though, I got to find something hot to drink because it is cold up here. So anyway, we are doing a series on coffee, and Pastor Rob mentioned last week that he likes his coffee very strong with room for cream, and I have to second that. I like it very strong, maybe too strong for some of you when I fix coffee for social events. Just come volunteer, and then you won't have to drink my strong coffee. That's another point all by itself. But I like my coffee kind of like I like my life, strong with lots of room for the good stuff. And I've noticed that the good stuff is the God stuff, right? So we want to live a life that has room to savor the good stuff, the God stuff in our life. That's how we're supposed to live. So let's start today with a quick review of living life with room versus living life full to the brim. Remember, with room is the amount available beyond what is necessary. Because see, we all have things in our life that we have to do, right? We have to have a job. We have to pay the bills. We have to pay taxes. We have different things that we have to do. But we need to learn to save some room for the things that God wants to do and the wonderful things in life. So Pastor Rob gave us some good examples last week for creating room in our lives. Putting some money in savings before you budget out the rest of it. That is a great example of living with room in your life. Giving yourself an extra 15 minutes to be somewhere. Now, this is very challenging for me because I'm always like, but I could quick put these dishes in the dishwasher or throw that load of laundry or get this last thought typed out or whatever. But getting there 15 minutes early, it gives you room. It's breathing room. You're not quite so harried. In fact, I have this really good friend in Texas. His name is Pastor Mike, and he has this term called loitering with intent, which you're like, what does that mean? Well, he will purposely arrive someplace anywhere between an hour and 15 minutes early to whatever it is he needs to be at, just to see who's there, hang out, talk with them, and look for a divine appointment. And I can't tell you how many divine appointments he has had with me and how many times he's sowed into my life because he showed up early and he loitered with intent. I just thought that was a really neat mindset towards people, that whoever was there, God had something set up for them to talk about. I was actually really challenged last week because Pastor Rob and I and our family, we tend to live very full lives, which you guys know. But last week, I did really well about sitting and reading a book. I actually got halfway through a book last week. I lingered over coffee with Rob. I walked places instead of drove or took my bike places, which if you take your bike, it's way easier to say hello to people than if you take your car. Just an aside. So this idea of living with room, it's a mindset change for us, isn't it? I love the scripture that he shared last week, and really he only shared a tiny chunk of it, and we're going to delve into all of it a little later in the message. But it said in Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world. we have to remember that the pattern of this world is deeply flawed and broken. And so if we conform our lives to it, our lives are going to be deeply flawed and broken. We need to understand that our culture is clearly pulling us toward life full to the brim. It's not waiting on us to make that decision to be busy. It's making that decision for us. I've heard it said many times that if the devil can't get you to sin, he'll just keep you busy. Have you guys heard that before too? But if you think about it, the devil can't get you to sin. He's going to keep you busy. How many of you would spend more time in the Word if you simply had the time? How many of you would spend more time with your family if you simply had the time? Or more time reflecting on God and who He is and what He's done for you and what He has planned for you in the future if you just had the time to be still and think about it. In our reading last week, we got to a point in 1 Chronicles where David went before the Lord. It says he sat before the Lord and said, "Who am I, O Lord, that you brought me this far?" We need time to do that, to just go, "Lord, who am I that you brought me this far? Your goodness on my life is so great," because we can live life with our foot pushed to the pedal so hard that we never even stop to think about who we are, what God's done for us, and where we're going. And we see that example in King David. So do we even have time to think about that? Are you thinking about that in your life? Do you have time to recognize and respond to God's goodness? Satan would like to keep you too busy to interact with God, too busy to hear from Him and to receive instruction and encouragement and even correction. Satan would really like that. And he uses our culture to keep us busy. So living with room means that we're going to have to fight against the undertow of the world's way and exert some force to live God's way. So as a kid, we had 4 kids, and my dad was like Boy Scout and that kind of thing. So we did a lot of camping until I was about 12. Something changed after that. I think we added the 4th kid, and it got too complicated at that point. But we did a lot of camping and canoeing. And so I loved to canoe. We did a lot of that growing up, and we've had a few opportunities as a family to do that, but we've always canoed on lakes and ponds, which are pretty boring by canoeing standards, right? And so when the Founders Day thing happened last week, I realized that they had the canoeing opportunity to canoe the Des Moines River here in town. We got in at Vets Park and got down towards Call State Park. And my kids hadn't done that, so we thought this would be really fun. And I wondered how much work it was going to be to canoe a river because I hadn't done it since I was like 11 or 12. So we got in, and we were with a big group, and everyone else was a beginner. And we paddled a little bit, and then we sat there. And then we paddled to stay with the group, and I'm like, "Rob, I want to go fast, because, it's a river. It could have been so exciting, but we stayed with the group. And I'm thinking, wow, this is really, really easy, because basically all we did was steer, and the river took us wherever we needed to go, But I thought, now if we were going to go against this current, this would be a totally different story. We'd be pouring sweat and working hard and probably not getting anywhere because we'd realize how terribly out of shape we all are, right? And so it takes a lot of work to go against the current, a lot of effort to go against the current in a canoe. The same thing culturally. Culture is going to keep you busy, too busy to think about God, too busy to interact with Him. We have to intentionally say, no, I'm going to make room in my life to interact with God, to hear from Him, to be corrected by Him, to respond to Him, to pour that into my children's life or my grandchildren's life or my neighbor's life. I'm going to have to make room. It's easy to cave into that current of culture, but paddling upstream requires more effort. And we label that effort as intentionality, doing things on purpose. We have to make conscientious choices to set a more slow, roasted pace for our lives, that we live slow enough to savor the flavor of our lives. So how many of you guys like to barbecue or eat barbecue? That's what I like to do, right? or even like crock pot cooking, anything that is slow roasted, it takes time, but it takes intentionality. I've noticed the crock pot is a wonderful invention because it can cook a meal without heating up my kitchen, but I have to remember to prep the food and put it in it. I have to put aside time to do that. The same thing is true of our lives. We have to think ahead about the choices we're making and where we're going. To have that slow roasted pace, it's going to take consideration and planning. Culture says that our value is connected to what we produce. This is why slow roasted is hard for us. This is why it's tough to slow down and hear from God, because our culture says you're only valuable if you are a producer. We see this kind of thinking everywhere. This is why keeping up with the Joneses is a thing, right? Because we want to be producers. Our culture says that producers are valuable. We also see the damages of this kind of thinking, that non-producers are cast aside by society. The elderly, the infirmed, the handicapped, the socially awkward, they're not producers. So as a culture, we don't value people that fall in those categories. But the gospel shows us a very different approach to these least of these, right? The gospel reminds us that we are valuable because of whose we are, not because of who we are. And when we remember whose we are, we can resist that constant pull of the culture to produce and keep busy. A slow roasted life acknowledges that everything we have comes from God. A slow roasted life takes time to appreciate all the things that God offers us. This week, in my pursuit of a slow roasted life, we dropped Eli off at work one day and we took Sarah to the rose garden here in town. And we literally took time to stop and smell the roses. Can you remember the last time you did that? Where you just walked through a garden to revel in God's creation and stop and smell the roses. It was an awesome thing. A slow roasted life acknowledges that everything we have comes from God. And a slow roasted life takes the time to appreciate what God offers us. The thing is, when we eat food, we get full, right? But there's a lag. Have you ever noticed this? You eat a meal and you're like, oh, this is so good, this is so good, this is so good. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can't eat another bite. I'm so full. Why is there not a shorter distance between this is good and I'm so full? But there's a lag. They say it's 20 minutes between when the belly says, hey, I'm full, and the brain goes, hey, you're full. And then you get that, you know what feeling I'm talking about, that really horrible, I can't quite get enough breath in there because my stomach's so full. That's not healthy, right? But our lives are the same way. It can be so full that we don't even realize that we're overfull. We got to stop and consider our lives to realize, hey, our life is actually already full. A slow roasted life pauses to consider the important, even over the urgent. The urgent will always be there. There will always be someone calling you to sell you long distance or life insurance or protection on your computer or whatever. There will always be, commercials screaming at you. There will always be bills to pay. There will always be people demanding your time. That's the urgent. But what is the important? The important is learning to listen to the voice of the Lord and to respond to it. A slow roasted life debunks the lie of busy. I'm going to give you the truth about busy this morning. Busy doesn't mean spiritual. Busy doesn't mean important. Busy doesn't even mean valuable. In fact, busy can interfere with a lot of those things. Busy can interfere with spiritual. Busy can interfere with important. And busy can really interfere with valuable. Church, we need to realize that culture can become a tool in the hands of the enemy, and we need to be aware of that. Culture will drag you away from what is most important towards what is least important. Think about it. Culture will drag you away from morality. It'll drag you away from God's presence, from your family, from your calling. We have to fight the current for those things. Culture will make you busy with good things and leave you no room for the best things. When you come to dinner at my house, 9 times out of 10, we'll sit down and I say, here's what we're having, but save room because there's dessert. Because dessert is my specialty. Food, I just make because people need to eat to survive. But dessert, to me, is, the highlight event. And I can't tell you how many times we've had something and we'll get almost done with dinner and I'll say to Rob, don't stuff yourself, there's dessert. And he's like, you didn't tell me there was dessert. Because it's the best part of the meal, right? You eat the food because you need the nutrients, but dessert, that's the good part. A full life, a life full to the brim, it doesn't leave room for dessert. God wants you to have a full life, but his idea of full is very different than the world's idea of full. His idea of full is full of him, a life empowered by his Spirit to make an impact on the world around you. If our lives are too full of the world, we don't have any room left for God, and he's the best part of life. He's the dessert. He's the part that makes life sweet and worth it. He's the part that makes life make sense. So we have to make sure that we have room to consider him and include him in every part of our life. And we have to make good choices, best choices. So how do we separate the good choices from the best choices? We look at Ephesians 5:15 through 17. Ephesians 5:15 through 17. It says, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. You guys can turn on the news for 20 seconds today and know that the world is evil, right? We know that this verse applies to us now. So if wise living means making the most of every opportunity, then unwise living is not making the most of every opportunity. And if wise living is understanding what the Lord's will is, then unwise living is not understanding what the Lord's will. Wisdom and opportunity and God's will, they're all connected. Now, God's will seems to be a white stag for a lot of Christians. Do you know what I mean by a white stag? Something that people look really hard for, but they're not really certain that it exists. Something we put a lot of effort into, but very few actually feel that they've found it. God's will, though, it does exist. It's very clear, actually, and it's both general and specific. Let me frame that out for you here. God's general will is true for all humanity. He has a will that he desires for every person. And we can actually find it in that same chapter in Ephesians 5, in verses 1 and 2. Here is God's general will for humanity. Be imitators of God. Therefore, as dearly loved children, and live a life of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and a sacrifice to God. There it is. God's general will for humanity. Love him and love one another. That love will fulfill the Great Commission. If you truly love God and your heart becomes his heart, you're going to automatically tell others about Christ because you won't be able to help but share the truth of Christ with the world around you. And you'll lay down your life just as he laid down his life for you. His general will for all humanity is to love him and to love one another, to imitate him as dearly loved children. I've got a picture here I'm going to show you. This is Sarah at 2. This was on her 2nd birthday. My mother made her this tutu out of tulle, and it had flowers sewn in it and butterflies, and it was just adorable. And that entire year, she spent running around the house as most 2-year-old little girls do, pushing her shopping cart, carrying a purse over her shoulder, and sometimes sunglasses on her head or over her eyes. And she would shop the house and put things from the house in the cart. And she was just being like mommy. Oh, she had little plastic high heels too, of course, which she was, and then she'd fix meals and have tea and the sort of things that 2-year-olds do. But she was imitating her mom, I don't wear a tutu, but I will wear a good maxi skirt. So she was imitating. And that's what God tells us to do, is love him so much that we imitate him, that we do like he does. And yeah, it's going to be messy at first, and we're not going to quite get it right, and we may trip along the way, but we'll figure it out more and more the longer we walk with him, just as Sarah is figuring out more and more every day how to be the Sarah that God's designed her to be. Imitation is the highest form of flattery, and God asks us to be imitators, to cultivate a heart like his. This is his desire for all of us. His general will for all of humanity is that we would be like him, that we would love him and love others. Now, God's specific will is a little more complicated. It's individual. It's a highly personalized plan for each person that fits within the context of his general will for all people. God's specific will for your life is never going to circumvent his general will for humanity. Does that make sense? You're one specific puzzle piece in a large puzzle that's for all of humanity. God's specific will requires our pursuit of God and our obedience to him to uncover. If you haven't found God's specific will for your life right now, you need to put some elbow grease into it. Get in the Word, pray, ask him to reveal himself. And when he asks you to do something, do it. He's not going to show you the next step if you didn't do the first step. And the cool thing about God's specific will is that it does change as our lives change, as we age, as we add children or a spouse to the mix. As life changes, he'll alter that course and design a will that's specific both for today and for your life as a whole. So we look for God's will in every opportunity. We remember his general will and we look for his specific will. Wise people look for God's will in every opportunity. 1 Corinthians 10:23 says, "You say, I am allowed to do anything, but everything is not good for you. You say, I am allowed to do anything, but everything is not beneficial." Allowable does not necessarily mean beneficial. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you necessarily should. So we need to ask ourselves some questions. Let's use an example. Someone asks you, hey, can you do this next Saturday? Most of us answer or ask ourselves a series of good questions like, well, am I free? Do I have the time? Do I have the resources? Do I want to do this? Is there anything wrong with me doing this? These are all good questions. Good questions will lead good choices or will yield good choices, but better questions will yield better choices. A better question is to ask, when we're finding the difference between good and best, is in the light of this, is it wise? In the light of this, in the light of fill in the blank, is this wise? So we'll fill in this with the things that you value. So here's some examples. In the light of the fact that I haven't spent much time with my children this week, is it wise for me to make another appointment? In the light of my future hopes and dreams, is it wise for me to blow off another night in front of the TV? In the light of the fact that we have 2 children in diapers and my wife has that crazy cabin fever look in her eyes, should I go out with the guys this evening? In the light of having just a couple years left with my children, is it wise for me to start a new career? In the light of my financial goals, is it wise for me to make this purchase? You can see where this in the light of question can help you determine when to say no, but it also helps us determine when to say yes. Here are a couple other examples. In the light of my spiritual state, my current spiritual state, is it wise for me to skip Sunday school this morning and sleep in? In the light of the lack of good communication with my spouse lately, is it wise for me to sign up for this marriage retreat? In the light of our busy schedules, is it wise to designate a family night once a week and guard it? See, the question is not whether it's right or whether it's wrong, or can we do it? God's word is actually abundantly clear on what's wrong and what's right. But the question we need to ask ourselves is this wise? Is this moving me towards God's best for my life? So living with room means saying no to many good things so that we can say yes to the very best things. It's inviting God into every decision and every interaction that we have. This morning, we actually have someone who's saying yes to the very best thing. Heather's going to be baptized this morning, so I'm going to dismiss her at this time so she can go get ready for that. When we make unwise choices about our opportunities, two things get squeezed out. This is why it's so important to make good decisions. The two things that get squeezed out are time with God and times of rest. Time with God and times of rest. The reality is that without these two essential elements in our life, we quickly gravitate towards busy and meaningless. And monotony and burnout aren't far behind. Satan would like for you to live in monotony and burnout. That's where he wants us to dwell. In fact, he'd actually like to push us all the way to anxiety, depression, and self-destruction. Because monotony and burnout, they don't usually stay there. They usually move into deeper territory. He would like us to live the way the rest of the world lives. But that's not what God's called us to. Remember, I said I'd come back to our first scripture, Romans 12:2, and look at it as a whole. It gives us a very clear key to Christian nonconformity. It says, "Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." We transform our minds by our time with God and our times of rest. We spend time in God's presence, and then we give ourselves room to think about what he said to us in our presence. We give ourselves room to apply it to our lives. Times that we can reflect and meditate and wonder over his word and his will for us. Living with room keeps us on guard against Satan's subtle and subversive attacks in our life. He's that ever-pulling current, drifting us away from God. But living with room gives us time to consider and be intentional. Living with room allows us the time and space we need to consider the trajectory of our lives and the effects of our relationships with others. How much time have you spent thinking about your relationships with others this week? How you're relating to the people in your household or in your family or in your neighborhood? We need to have time to think about that in order to change that course. Living with room helps us fight that ever-pulling current of culture to be busy, to not have time for God. Living with room gives us space to enjoy the rich and sweet parts of life, the God stuff. Today, I wanted to finish with room. I wanted to leave a little bit of space in the cup of today's message so that God can do his part and pour in the good stuff and make the entire sermon more palatable, because that's what cream and sugar does, right? It just makes coffee more palatable. We're going to play a song this morning, and I'd just like to invite you to percolate on it a little bit. The song is actually pretty neat. Rob met a friend in college. Their first day of college, they were sitting next to each other, and they realized not only had they both gotten married over the summer, but they'd gotten married on the same day. And so we've been friends with these folks for almost 20 years. And he wrote this song, and it's called Slow Down, the tyranny of the urgent. So I hope you'll just listen to the words and allow God to speak to your heart about being slow roasted.
You say to her through gray tinted sunglasses, the world seems to blend in black and white. She says to you in a way that distracts the wise from her own eyes. You see so dimly the light that makes Christ so right. Slow down, take it easy. Life doesn't have to pass you by. Slow down, take a breather. Be still, remember who made the day. Remember who made the day. You say to her, so what's it like to have the answers? Curiously, you don't condemn me with your mouth. She says to you, well, have you tasted a sunrise? Without Jesus, you have no way, no how. Slow down, take it easy. Life doesn't have to pass you by. Slow down, take a breather. Be still, remember who made the day. 1, 2, remember who made